Our story begins with the remnants of a tea ceremony, with mugs and old maps on the table, because this is the land of Asur. On one of them, we see quite clear drawings. Along with the gods and witches, the intersection of technology and magic was supposed to lead to the civilization's advancement. However, 1,000 years ago, peace on Earth was completely disrupted by the appearance of demons, who looked very intimidating and inspired fear in everyone's eyes. The flame of war between the demons and the witches spread quickly. It was not until 100 years later that a magic genius, with the help of the elemental gods, sealed the demons away with a talisman. He was very strong, and after 1,000 years, a wave of danger is quietly creeping up as the talisman weakened. Everything was in a purple gloom, which looked very frightening and inspired fear, because darkness is coming again. The elemental gods who once reigned in the chaos, they fought in the seas, in the forests, and even in the sky and on the earth. There were those who called themselves lords of fire, of wind, and there was also the god of thunder. All of them have already fallen. But quite unexpectedly, in the meantime, a new lord of the sea's successor appeared in the ocean. He was still very young, but serious enough. Everyone noted that the water god disappears without a trace among the waves. To investigate the talisman's irregular change, he has hidden my godly powers and took on the identity of a new student at Askar Academy. He was sitting at his desk and remembered how the teacher came up to him and asked, "Is the history of the magic he is teaching a lullaby?" He really didn't like the fact that the boy wasn't listening to anything and was asleep in class. So he ordered him to go stand outside in the hallways if he wanted to sleep more. But he was not the only one fighting. Rising to her feet and approaching her desk, the girl immediately fell to her knees, turning to the boy, asking what he was dreaming of. This small and beautiful girl's name was Exier. She is a spirit who is helping him on his mission as an imposter. She will face the upcoming dangers with him. It was his assistant who was also an excellent partner. For example, if she needed to listen to his conversations, she would do so without any questions or objections. Similarly, if you need lightning and swift thunder, it won't be a problem for her either. Any wish. Here's another example. On this moonless and windy night, let the flames of murder rise up to the sky. He stood and waved his arms as it all came to fruition behind his back. That's the kind of assistant you have to try to find. Suddenly, tears started coming out of her eyes, and she really started crying. Immediately, I remembered a situation in which a guy ran into a room, and there were 3 armed sea warriors with no legs standing next to him, guarding a guy and a girl in a school uniform. What should he do? He remembered when he held on to the tree and reached out to help his friend. But unfortunately, it did nothing, and he was unable to save her. And now he was alone and began to cry, holding a magic ball in his hands. He was very sad. The only thing he thought about was whether a girl named Ming could hear his voice. They needed to get off this planet sooner, so today would be their chance, since today is the releasing day. Meanwhile, night had fallen and the crow was sitting on a tree branch in the woods, watching the situation intently. Then she spread her wings and flew away. Today was also a full moon. She flew toward the great palace, where, amazingly, no light shone in any of the windows. The guy at this point pulled a book off the shelf and began to study it. He didn't need the light at all. He seemed to be looking for something, as he tossed aside one book after another without finding the information he needed. He was beginning to get nervous, because no book suited him. He couldn't find what he was looking for. So he climbed to the very top shelf, hoping that he could find the very book there. And by all appearances, he did succeed. It wasn't easy, but he calmed down when he could find her. It was enchanted and full of magic, because even if you rub it, you will see the result instantly. Throwing half the books on the floor, he continued reading, learning a high-ranking magic at that. He had to let himself try to break his talisman. As he crossed his fingers, he lifted them up, and immediately water began to form and spiral around them. It was the seal of the sea that appeared right before his eyes. Without distraction, he instantly started waving his arms in different directions, giving direction to the water and looking at his seal. Disperse. He became very wary when everything around him was already in the water, and the spells from the book began to activate and manifest as well. At this point there were purple lightning bolts and bright glints in the book itself that went beyond the book. The guy was also very blinded by it, so he pulled his head back and closed one eye. He couldn't understand what had happened. Had it failed? But it's not right. The talisman is starting to fade, which really alarmed the guy. He saw the exact same seal in darkness that was mentioned at the beginning, and he couldn't figure out what these symbols were. It made him very gloomy and scared, because why would it appear in this academy? Immediately, a hand appeared behind his back, reaching out from the darkness, where nothing was visible but it. It was a girl who said hello to the guy and put her hand on his shoulder, which frightened him like a little child and started screaming and crying panically, dropping the book from his hands. She fell to the ground and he asked the assistone Don just appear out of nowhere. But she came closer and added that it is because you were too slow. The guy was again standing by the shelves of books, and a dialogue formed between them. Weren't you supposed to be enjoying the breeze outside? She was indignant and said, I haven't heard anything from you in so long. I am sick of waiting. The guy apologized, and she added that she could give him 10 more minutes to get ready, so let him try to finish faster. He wondered and looked at the floor, where the purple stripes from the book had also appeared. This surprised him, because was it really a book with a seal on it? How troublesome. He put his hand on his head and began to think about the whole situation. Immediately, a huge 15-meter-long snake appeared behind him, its eyes also glowing purple, and that really caught the guy off guard and surprised him. He took a piece of the purple remainder of the book in his hands and clenched it in his fist. It's surprisingly pretty sticky. At that moment, the snake appeared right in front of him, so there was no way to avoid it anymore. He definitely noticed it. Not believing his eyes, he decided once again to make sure, is it really a snake? Without thinking long, he quickly put his hand on the ground and was ready to use his powers. He froze, waiting for the snake to make the first move, but she abruptly became calm and just stared at the guy, exceeding him tenfold in size. He wondered if it was lured here by that book. The girl saw the little warning that the seal was emitting and was also surprised. A few seconds later, the whole room was covered in purple tentacles that formed from that book. The girl could not understand what was going on. Was it black magic? She was more worried about her friend than about herself, so the first thing she did was look in the direction where he was. She was frightened, for someone is coming. The boy, meanwhile, continued to look at the snake, showing it confidence in itself and its strength, trying not to show fear. But the snake was smiling. She was amused by the fact that such a small man was standing in front of her. Especially near her also appeared a purple glare, which came from that very book. The boy looked at him and realized he wasn't going to die yet. He looked again at the snake and also noticed this book. Was black magic sealed within that book? Surrounding himself with water, he tried to figure out if this was an illusion type of magic. The serpent, meanwhile, began to rush at him and was ready to rush into attack, so he had to be stopped urgently. The guy activated his abilities and spread his arms, opening a new stream of water. And then, a second later, he surrounded himself with a shield that protected him from this monster effortlessly. The snake had not expected such a turn of events, and was perplexed, for it had never encountered anything like this before. Meanwhile, the Lord Sea said that this is not at all, and it can deal physical damage. Then he immediately jumped into the kite as if it were on a bridge, and there was also water. So, it must be summoning magic. And while the guy was jumping, a girl came up to him and informed him that a patroller was coming over here, so he needed to retreat very urgently, without wasting time. Suddenly, her eyes filled with fear. She could not understand when and how the black snake entered here. But there was no time to explain. The guy continued his leap into the snake to give it a crushing blow. Besides, he began to activate the spell, saying, "O spirit who dwells in the sea, please awake from your slumber in between the deep crevices." He really needed support, so he commands them with the name of the Lord of the Sea to appear before him, the demon of envy, Leviathan. He began to glow and emit a lot of light energy, which made the snake even more shocked and unexpected. Immediately thereafter, the white beam pierced through her, damaging her very badly. Suddenly, some footsteps appeared out of the smoke. It was the watchman who came into the building after hearing some strange and incomprehensible noises to see what was going on. He had a flashlight and stopped unexpectedly between corridors, for he also could not believe that the noises would be just in the library. So he decided to reconnoiter the situation by asking if anyone was there right now. The assistant was not expecting this, because that was all they needed right now. At that moment, the knocking on the door continued. The girl immediately warned Ming to hurry up, because the patroller is about to come in. He was surprisingly very calm, saying that he understood and accepted the information she gave. Next, he tried to concentrate by closing his eyes and activating his magic one more time. This time it was the style of the tides. He opened his eyes at a moment when a very large amount of water had already gathered around him. So he ordered the water god disappears without a trace and continued waving his arms. A second later, huge waves of water began to move and disappear. The janitor opened the door, and without opening, his eyes said that he was tired of saying that if you want to use the library at night, you have to inform us beforehand. Suddenly, the wind blew through his head, causing him to be very surprised, for the library was unrecognizable. It was like a real robbery and vandalism, something he certainly didn't expect to see on his shift. He was terrified and started screaming, trying to find out what had happened here, at a time when not all the water particles had managed to get out and tried to disappear. Meanwhile, print history brings us back to the moment with the tea mug and the old map, which reports that our land Osir was once pure. Humans and spirits lived together, and all this was still along with the gods and witches. The intersection of technology and magic was supposed to lead to civilization's advancement. But however 1,000 years ago, a clan of demons suddenly launched an attack on the land. The serpent was just another head and superpower of the demon that was in the beginning. All this contributed to the beginning of the war between the demons and the witches. Many powerful witches and high-ranking spirits allied together to resist the demons. Despite managing to hold back the demon army's advances, the battle did not come to a standstill. Before us stood the 3 very monks who were the guardians of order and security. They were also involved in this 100-year war that had begun. Until the first magic academy of the land Oscar was established, which is also their current academy. It was the same building where the guy was looking for a book in the middle of the night. Here he is again, asleep at his desk while the principal is giving another lecture, which apparently is not very interesting. He talked about how the academy combined all the defenses of the land. After he noticed the sleeping boy, he paused a little and looked at him very intently, continuing his phrase, and finally sealed away the demons. Not seeing the boy's reaction, he used his spell and set a huge green snake on him. But he didn't care yet. He only opened one of his eyes and didn't understand what was going on, after which he was immediately bitten on the head. The teacher approached Hai Ming, who was trying to tear the snake off himself, and asked why he didn't say what the first big event the academy did after its establishment. Finally getting rid of the snake, he was able to lift his head and look at his teacher, for he did not understand at all what he was being asked. And so we're back to the very question that started this story. Is the history of magic I am teaching a lullaby? After that, he kicked the boy out of class if he needed more sleep. He rubbed his eyes and didn't understand. Do people who run around in the middle of the night to get things done even need a lullaby? Meanwhile, the demons too are sealed until that day, restoring the order of the land. It was 10 minutes to 10 on the academy clock, and the professor was thinking intensely about something too. That is his reason for showing up at Asker the demons that were sealed away with the talisman. Hai Ming also became very serious and prepared for the events to come. But from the outside, it didn't look as cool as it did in his head. Because the girls across from him laughed, asking, "Has he been punished?" But it didn't make the guy feel good, and he tried to explain to them that it was that giant black snake's fault last night. Seeing the guy standing there blushing in front of the girls, his assistant went up to him and said, "If it isn't our Lord of the Sea, you are being punished." How pitiful. She was also very pretty and smiling as she looked at him, for she dressed that way on purpose for all her meetings with him. He calmed down and said, "How dare she say that? If she weren't put into this situation by them, I would not even come to this academy." The girl came up and hugged him, saying not to mention there is a very powerful companion spirit, which is she, and she is following him. So, get your act together. And despite saying that, having to find the reason why the talisman has become weaker, they tried to understand this and came to the conclusion that together they had to face an unknown enemy, and the girl must protect Hai Ming well. It was her main goal for this period of life, which inspired her. The girl stepped back a little and realized that she had to try not to think about that anymore. But where did he go? But the guy just closed his eyes and thought about the situation. It never got out of his head that everything is always with the same pattern. Suddenly, the girl sneaked up on him again, unnoticed, and began to squeeze him tightly, ordering him not to ignore her anymore. But the guy just exhaled and tried to explain that the bell has already rung for recess. The girl became very wary and aggressive, because how dare he say that? Especially when he is only the acting lord, and he still carries the title of the Lord of the Sea. She stopped, clasped her hands together, and said that being able to ride the waves, calling upon the life of the seven seas, even the beasts of the abyss would listen to his calls. But the guy didn't want to listen to her. All his thoughts were just about the seal they saw. He wasn't interested in anything else. The girl put her hands behind her back and asked him if he really saw the symbols on the seal. But he was categorical and serious. "I can be wrong. I have seen that symbol before in a restricted book in Grandfather Hade's private collection." The assistant thought after these words, "It has sent the secret organizations of the land into chaos before." Their actions were suspicious, and there were marks of them all over the land. Hai Ming was also wary because everything related to it all vanished without a trace after the war. The girl was not thrilled with this information, and was really very surprised. Is he suspecting that the seal has something to do with the talisman becoming weaker? The Lord was also wary, for it seems that the key to the solution is very close indeed. He also added that Grandfather Hayes' guess should be correct. While they stood by the window and talked, they noticed that this academy has already been infiltrated with an unknown power. All the while they were being watched by a snake that seemed to be watching them, and was ready to pass all this information on. Having finished their conversation, they went out together for a walk, where the girl for some reason was very happy and flew beside the guy, who was still walking and thinking about his own thing. Suddenly she became very embarrassed and began to transform, turning at once into a very cute and very beautiful kitten. After that, she began to lick her paws and stopped when she realized that she was much more comfortable in physical form. They were almost to the entrance of the building, but the girl was confused by the boy's appearance, so she decided to find out what was wrong with him. Was he still thinking about the seal? He stopped and became very wary of the fact that the seal had appeared in the Academy of the Library. It means that it has connections to the Academy itself. But as a newcomer in this Academy, the amount of useful information I can access here is way too little. The girl asked, "Now where should I make my move?" She also specified that his body smelled rather bad, so it would be good for him to wash. He also wondered if he stank. But the assistant added, "That's weird. It wasn't here yesterday." Immediately after, they were surrounded on both sides by some strange guys who started stopping them and asking them to make way, and don't block Miss Cindy's path." They were as surprised and shocked as they could be, so they looked at them and back with wonder. It turns out there was already a carriage, which was harnessed at once 2 horses. At that moment, the first step was taken, and a very pretty girl came out into the street, followed also by a guy dressed in a similar way. His assistant was very surprised, asking who they were and why there were so many people around them. "She is Cindy Sandal, Asker Academy's Student Council's vice president. She was really very nice and pretty, and you could see the confidence in her eyes." Taking another step, she looked up, for she was standing in front of the main entrance to the Academy building, which had been designed by true masters and fans of their craft. You could say it was a little Hogwarts. But suddenly her gaze changed abruptly. A shadow and anger appeared over her eyes. It seems she is here to finish what she started. She turned to the guy and clenched her hand into a fist and said that she is back. He was perplexed by this, but she also went on to say that now, at last, she would be able to see her dearest big sister. Probably she must have gotten tired of waiting for her. She went on dreaming, her joy beyond measure. She added that Cindy will go and meet her now. Putting her hand over her heart, she was embarrassed again, which surprised her partner very much. He was disgusted. The vice president then cleared her throat and ordered the assistant to first report to the headmaster about the results of the examination of their branch schools this time. But she was still a little confused. Something was still bothering her because she couldn't stop thinking about this strange old man who must have leaked insider information again. It almost caused this mission to fail, so she will have to punish him later. She became very angry because if it weren't because of her precious big sister, she would have skinned and fed him to beasts already. How suddenly she was very surprised because she could not understand where was such a bad smell coming from. She looked toward the crowd and realized it was coming from someone in the crowd, so she asked to step to whoever was stinking now. Everyone started to disperse, and the guy's assistant asked him, "Shouldn't you try to get close to her, and why don't you try to fake a personality?" But the guy stopped her, because all the movements of the academy participants were always in the public eye. "Didn't Grandfather High say that we should lay low as best we can?" After that, he became alert and looked up, because since they did violate the boundary treaty in a way, each and every spirit or god were forced to sign the treaty, which forbade them from leaving their historical sites. The vice president at that moment asked everyone to disperse and looked warily towards the guys, at the moment when the Lord of Sea continued his story, mentioning that he is a human who became a god is an accidental loophole in the system. After these words, behind him stood the same girl who was very unhappy with the smell and asked him to turn around and stand in front of her. Ming was also surprised and asked if she was really sure that she was referring to him. Without answering a word, she immediately went as close as possible to him and began to examine and sniff him. She was very surprised and disturbed by the smell that departed from him, because this could not be any mistake, so he stank for sure. The VP immediately pointed her finger at him and asked if he was a newcomer in this school. The guy was completely uncomfortable with this, so he didn't even know how to react because he had just been laughed at in front of the whole academy. He just agreed and blushed a lot. After that, the girl immediately turned away from him and asked him to follow her to the meeting room, from which he was also no less surprised. But she waved her hand and said that he had no right to refuse. Immediately, now we begin to see a chess game in the midst of gloomy lighting, which is immediately watched by a huge snake, exactly the same that eavesdropped on the dialogue and attacked the guy. She crawled and watched near the chair of her boss, who was dressed in a black cape and watched the game of his wards. Everything was very gloomy and in dark colors, after which the snake crawled even closer to him, almost to the level of his head, after which it began to climb in, from which the chess player was very surprised, but did not particularly show any emotions, since he was also hiding behind a mask. A conversation began between them. Now that I think about it, That little Missy from the Sandal family found the newcomer who snuck into the library. What should we do now? As you understand, they already knew everything about the guy for a long time, and the smell from him was just a simple cover. Another monster with a Joker mask on his head immediately entered the conversation and gave his answer. The Sandal family has been giving us a lot of trouble. If we count in this newcomer with an unknown background, I am afraid our actions might be limited. After that, he also made his move on the chessboard, and suddenly someone also added that there is absolutely no reason to worry. It seems that this was the most important of them, because the chess players fell silent and stared intently in his direction, waiting for his further comments. He also continued that the smell has already been imprinted, after which he also took the chess in his hand and made his move, adding that now they just have to wait for them to fight against each other. It was really very creepy. A smile immediately appeared on his face, which inspired fear and misunderstanding. You must agree. Meanwhile, the girl led the boy into one of the meeting rooms, opened the curtain, and said that this newcomer had arrived. She also emphasized the fact that his body had the scent of a seal on it. Now it was clear why the smell was coming from him so strongly at the time. But the guy was very surprised because the atmosphere here felt very strange. He also hoped that Exier was doing fine outside. Immediately after the guy was introduced, they started discussing him, asking could he be one of their participants? But one of them also replied that he could only confirm the fact that the guy had touched the seal. That's why he's only thinking about this situation right now. Could there be any chance that he could be their secret agent? Immediately, I was reminded of the fact that 3 days ago, outside the academy, it was very dark, and there was an owl flying around that noticed something very suspicious indeed. Then, in the middle of the deep night, something started to explode. This was immediately followed by some footsteps accompanied by a smile on the face of some monster who was very impressed to go to such lengths to chase after him. It turned out that he was not alone at all, but with his partner, and they were standing at the very top of the academy in the middle of a full moon, discussing a very important situation. One of them added that no wonder you are from the head of the 7 great ducal families, the Sandal family's young Miss Cindy Sandal. After all, she was the one standing in the middle of the explosion in the middle of the night, and around her there was a very bright yellow glow that looked like an electrical discharge. The masked men continued their dialogue. This small mischief of our doing. It is not something so great that it had to concern the young miss of the Sandal family. Her gaze immediately became as cold-blooded and full of determination and anger as possible, and she said that he blabbers too much. Then immediately she created a huge yellow hole near the scene of the explosions, with gold chains that went toward the 2 masked, unidentified men who were discussing her. She was furious and wanted to destroy them. But they were also not as simple as they might seem at first glance, which is why they also used their abilities to also protect themselves from the magical chains that the girl threw away. She began to laugh, for the chain practically surrounded the protection of the masked unknowns, who also hovered in the air above them. They also had a lot of fun because things were really starting to get more and more interesting, as the monsters looked down to see what was happening now. It turns out that the girl's boyfriend came to the rescue, who heroically tried to drag these monsters to himself, or to squeeze them with a chain, depending on his luck. They could not have expected such a turn of events at all, so they began to discuss the situation, adding that Miss Cindy had shown them her nature, so they began to worry that their plans had been spoiled. There was no point in them being here anymore, so they apologized and said we would be taking our leave first. The guy at this point was still trying to pull them to the ground, and the girl started screaming that Victor wouldn't dare do that. The guy then made another sharp swing with his hand, which allowed the chains to further constrict the defenses and bring the monsters closer to him. But they didn't seem to care, because they kept laughing and started to say goodbye to them, after which another huge explosion appeared in the sky, which dispersed the whole big cloud and broke the magical chains. And then, within seconds, there was not even a trace in the sky of the events that had just taken place, except for the smoke that had formed from the explosion even earlier. The guy immediately apologized to the girl, but she said it was okay, though she was as angry and agitated as possible, saying that they should at least not let them get away with it. After which she offered to just go to the academy together. And so, she reached out her hand to open the curtains and look in the mirror. She couldn't help thinking that she has only been gone a month, but the seal has already blended itself into the student body. She turned to him and asked if Haiming Oceanus was really standing in front of him. Then I asked him to tell me what's the objective. Hiding himself in Oscar Academy? The guy was very excited and frightened by this, because he had no idea how they were able to discover his identity. So he urgently needed to come up with something. He rolled his hand behind his head and said he was here to learn magic, of course, because only those with magic can have a bright future, you see. You could tell something strange by his behavior. So the girl clenched her hand into a fist and put her mug of tea on the table, then said she should have known better that you wouldn't admit everything that easily. It was clear from her that she didn't trust the guy, so she turned to Victor to fix the situation. He immediately waved his hand and said he understood, which also really scared the guy and made him think. Suddenly, Victor snapped his fingers and began to smile mysteriously. Everything around became black and white. The glare of lightning appeared, as well as that very seal at the bottom, which really shocked the guy. He became very serious and angry. Does this appear to be a high-ranking enchantment? After which the entire room has been locked down. Yellow ribbons also appeared, which were also magical with lightning discharges, operated by the same girl. She used them to create 3 yellow guards of order at once, who started screaming that now the guy was going to end and die, because they immediately started pulling out their weapons and attacking him at a time when he was just watching the situation going on and trying to figure out what he should do. At that moment there was also thunder and lightning outside, which very much caught the green-voiced girl's attention. She looked out the window and saw huge black clouds, after which she immediately thought of Cindy. It was the president to whom the assistant had reported that some things had happened. She was very startled that Miss Cindy is bullying a newcomer again. The president was also a little surprised and thought about it. Then she looked up at the sky and at the situation going on, saying that she understood everything. At that moment, the guard swung his axe and then struck the ground with all his might, breaking the concrete floor. And the guy just watched what was going on and tried to figure out what to do. At this point, the second guard also came up from behind and swung at the guy, which he was ready for. That's why at the moment of impact he jumped up and did a somersault, dodging the blow and landing on his hand. He also swung and kicked back, which struck the guard's head, causing him to fall and throw the weapon from his hands. After that, a huge cloud of smoke formed, just like the one at the academy that night, among which you could hear the order to the warriors not to go overboard. A second later, another guard flew from the smoke at the guy, who already wanted to destroy him with his sword, and brought him as close as possible to the guy's face. But he was also concentrated and activated his water power, which completely paralyzed the hand of the guard and protected the guy from the blow, surrounding him on all sides with water. He tried to speak respectfully to the vice president, who looked at him, asking what she was trying to do. But she was very surprised, so he can dodge it. Looks like he has some talent. He was very surprised that she ignored him, so he turned to her again, saying, "If you are going to continue doing this, I will have to call for the professors to deal with this problem." He also reflected on the fact that it was really very good that he told Exier to wait for him outside. At that moment, Victor swung around to punch the guy in the back of the head, which he also felt and became wary. So he instantly reacted and ran away, which also surprised his abuser by breaking through the smoke barrier. Cindy analyzed the situation and could not understand how he managed to summon a magic barrier in a moment. She also didn't understand how he was able to block himself from fatal damage. But during the escape, the guy hurt his arm very badly, and also injured himself additionally, so he stopped to catch his breath. His hand was completely damaged. He looked at it and realized, even surrounded by the water barrier, it still dealt this much damage. After him, he decided to cry out in pain for a while, when suddenly he was surrounded again by that smoke barrier with lightning, immediately after which the guards and the very team from which he had already seemingly escaped reappeared. So without thinking long, he immediately decided to ask them, "What should I do?"